And hello, everybody. Welcome back to Presence and this four-part series on science and spirituality. So glad to have you with us here for episode 2. And I am back with author Joe Masterleo of The Ambient Christ. We're going to dig deeper today, so we're glad you're with us to be in on this conversation. Joe, welcome to the conversation. How are you doing today, man?
Good. It's good to be back. Good to be a part of this series and the discussion on integration.
Integration, that's a big word. At Presence, we talk about an umbrella concept of integral theology. And of course, Joe, your book is all about the integrated, integral nature of nature. And so I thought we might just start today with how our work in some areas, obviously, in an all story, overlaps with the foundational principles that you've talked about in Ambient Christ. And one of the concepts would be the idea of cosmology. Within the biblical narrative, of course, cosmology is a major point. It's in our minds a two-tier, first cosmology, second cosmology, the seen and the unseen. The seen would, of course, be realms of form. That which is unseen would be the realm of formlessness, and it represents two creations, which gets a person into cosmologies. And I'll be talking about that more in later episodes from the theological side, doing some drill downs. But give us some idea of what you were thinking about when you wrote this, what you're trying to get across here in your book.
What I was trying to do is explore and find out in my explorations what the nexus might be between the information that science has so far, particularly in the area of quantum mechanics, and scripture. And so, you move into the area of cosmology. Cosmology can simply be defined as the study of the origins, history, and evolution of the universe. And science has a story about that. And religions typically have a story about that. And they're typically thought of as separate. One is organized along more empirical scientific lines. It has to, you have to have evidence for it. It has to be measured, has to be replicated, has to be quantified. And religions rely more on traditions that were handed down about creation stories. Okay. Now, so cosmology basically comes in two flavors: scientific and religious. And they're thought of and discussed as separate. Now, a couple things occurred to me. Number one, if there's an implicate order, that is, if there's an invisible order that undergirds and underlies all things, a unified field out of which multiplicity evolves and unfolds, okay? There is no separation. If, as the mystical traditions tell us in world religions and spiritualities, everything is one, and quantum physics tells us that as well, then from the standpoint of the implicate order, there is no siloed or distinctive categories, as we've mentioned before. No pure siloed biology, chemistry, physics, theology, scientific cosmology, or religious cosmology. From the standpoint of the implicate order, they are there's really no difference. They're competing partial truths. I think that's the best way to put it.
Because really
Okay,
what we're talking about from the implicate side is that which comes from the same source.
right,
When we get in, for example, in the work that they're doing in Theology Without Walls, which we've talked about to our presence audience,
right.
they're getting at ultimacy. What is this ultimacy and the meaning of that ultimacy? And that becomes the source. Now, from the source, you would have originally in Big Bang, you would have involution, right? And that involution is the emptying out or the pouring out of what we see, bringing about the elements of this
Mhm.
universe. And then in the coalescence of it all, really where science begins and the narrative stories begin in religion is with evolution, which is the earliest movements of our history and beyond us, even before us, of how all this evolved forward and is again converging back into uh, formlessness.
Yeah, it involutes again. It
Yeah,
starts out,
exactly.
with, um, the primary invisible substance of all form moves into form and the multiplicity of form. That is, it evolves in that direction. And then in its evolutionary trajectory, in its most developed capacity, it involutes, that is, it gradually moves back to origins again, sort of like in a circuit.
Yes, yes. So
Um,
basically, one of the concepts, Joe, that you talk about in cosmology that's at the heart of this story, really, and for people that want to know where you really get into the depths of science, you do a lot of work that begins with the concept of light and electricity and electromagnetism. So maybe you could relate cosmology and light a little bit and what you were thinking about how all of that begins, evolves, etc.
yeah, so in my own search to find out if there was a common element, say between traditional religious cosmology or cosmologies, scripture, for example, the creation story, and scientific cosmologies. Okay, I mean, obviously, they're both dealing with foundational aspects of reality, slices of reality that they're talking about, very primary, primal, foundational ingredients. So, my question at the beginning of my search was, well, what might these things have in common as I take a look at both of their explanations, their theories, their narratives, and so forth. And to me, it was fairly obvious. I mean, I didn't approach it with my mind already made up as to what it was, but it just sort of jumped out at me. For example, as I looked at scripture, just in Genesis 1 alone, the word light in the first chapter of Genesis appears 10 times. You gotta take note of that.
Right.
you know. Um, in fact, the light that was referred to in Genesis 1:3, let there be light, or in some translations, let light be, with a capital B.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that particular light that's referred to in the sequence of the creation story was created before the sun, which came some verses later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be a distinctive form of light. Now, when you look on the science side, particularly with respect to some of the findings of quantum mechanics and the quantum platform, is an energy field. The infinite invisible
Yes.
the extrasensory part of creation,
Yep.
is posited as a spectrum of light and vibrating light energy, vibrating at various frequencies. The higher the frequency on the spectrum of electromagnetic energy, that is the spectrum of electromagnetic energy in science is basically light energy that exists on a continuum of different frequencies. The highest frequency of which is the source of all of creation. And it's the higher end frequency is more invisible. The lower the frequency, the more that energy materializes and becomes visible and eventually is solid form. The slowest form of vibrating light energy, says physics on the spectrum, is solid matter, or what appears to be solid matter. It's really, they tell us, not solid. There's more space in solid matter than there is solidity. In fact, Einstein said there's no such thing as solidity. It just appears, things appear solid, but there's more space between what appears to be solid particles than there is anything else. So, looking at the scientific end, light also appears there as very central in the created order. Things vibrating at different frequencies. And there's a range there in the spectrum of light. And that includes microwaves, radiation, radio and TV waves, the sun's rays, and so forth. There's a whole spectrum of light. So it seemed like both cosmologies, it was sort of safe to conclude, or at least ponder the notion, that there's a common universal element here that they seem to have in common. And then when you explore on the scripture side even further, you see that the scriptures are saturated with light and verses about light. Christ, one of his identifiers, I am the light of the world.
Yes. Which
most people, take metaphorically, and I'm sure it's meant that way, but it may be quite literal as well as we go on a little further here. His appearance on the Mount of Transfiguration to the disciples, his mortal body was unveiled basically, and they were able to see, his basically his quantum or spiritual body, and the light was so bright they had to cover their eyes and fall to the ground.
Which is really the same experience Moses had.
Moses had that. Yeah.
And yes. And again, when you actually look at source, John, especially 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, his writings, he talks about God is light.
Yes.
And then he says, we are children of light.
Yes.
So this idea, I like this idea that it's all about vibrations, this light energy, if you will, and the way it solidifies or concretizes, if you will.
Yes.
And that in and of itself, to me, is showing a unity that is indisputable. I mean, I don't know how one could not see the movement from a separation consciousness to a unity consciousness when you understand that all things, even though they look different, ultimately their source goes all the way back to that which said, let there be light, which is light, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, that's true. And there are many other places in scripture, Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. As you mentioned, Moses, when he came down from the mountain the second time with the tablets,
yes,
his face was irradiated.
Yes.
He had been in God's presence.
So, and actually, I think too, Joe, while I'm thinking about this, Jesus was teaching in the Gospels, and he said, don't put a basket over your light. which to me is saying don't put form over light. Form relates to that first cosmology of law, boundary-driven thinking, and doing. That all relates to form. Don't put form over the light. Jesus's cross event, in essence, was detachment from form, which allowed that ambient Christ light to shine forward. He did not allow form to block out the light. By his faith, he knew that he was light, as you just said. So again, I think when you start, it's an interesting thing. People don't think that much about light till you start this discussion. Then you realize it.
Yeah, in the Gospel of John, John refers to God as light, I think it's 44, 45 times, refers to Christ as the light that lights every man, every person that comes into the world.
Mhm.
So light is central, not just integral, it's central to
Yes.
creation and the created order.
Yes.
And one can conclude, that spirit is not only the substance of all form, but you can logically conclude that the substance of all form, or spirit, is light.
Mhm.
And you can later equate that with love and gravity, which we can get into, a little bit later.
Yeah, as we move along, and I think probably in our discussions we've had, it's always tricky to try to parse out 4 episodes that are in a time
Sure.
frame that are watchable for our audience,
Sure.
so that they can take it in episodes. But we do want to get into your concept at the end of this, just so people know where we're headed with this, and your concepts of Cosmo Theology, which are very interesting and that really caught my attention in the beginning, because in essence that was speaking the same language, if you will. But this light then is very much connected to so many concepts. I mean, in and of itself, it's energy, but specifically the thing that I learned the most in your book were the things that kind of went down the line from the electric universe theory and people like Tesla, and those that concentrated on light and electricity and electromagnetism and that model. Can you say a few things about that and maybe move into Tesla a little bit, who was so prominent in the discoveries about that energy?
Yeah, I do want to say a few things, about that. I think when we follow the development and discoveries of science, particularly when we move into the quantum mechanics realm, light, the phenomenon of electromagnetism as the substrate or the foundation of the implicate order, become more and more the subatomic parts of creation, figure, electromagnetically more and more central as the substance of the implicate order. I did want to get into one of the clues, and as I proceeded to entertain the notion that the common universal element between the two cosmologies, science and religion, was light. I began to move and read about people who were sort of pioneers in electromagnetism, innovators or inventors, and so forth, that made a difference in changing the world. Now, one of the clues and cues to developing a new model, an integrated model, I picked up from Nikola Tesla. Tesla was a Serbian immigrant who came over. He was educated over there in Serbia as an engineer, a very bright genius in himself, came over with like 10 cents in his pocket, wanted to work for Edison, Edison had a problem because he didn't know how to transmit electricity over long distances cheaply. He had to have a dynamo or a generator at every city block, which is very expensive and prohibitive. And so Tesla wanted to work for him. He was hired by Edison and asked Edison what he was working on. He said, I can't figure out a way to get electricity over long distances. And so Tesla said, I think I can figure that out. And within a few weeks, he invented alternating current, which made it possible, for electricity to be spread over long distances. But for our purposes and my purposes, being an electrical genius, he wasn't a profiteer and a capitalist like some of his financial backers, J.P. Morgan and Westinghouse. They basically used him to line their pockets. Edison called him the poet of electricity because he was such a dreamer. He wanted to make electricity cheaply available to everybody because he knew it was in the atmosphere. He knew space wasn't empty space. In fact, one of his quotes, I believe, was, there's more energy in one cubic centimeter of empty space to boil all the oceans in the world.
And because that was not economically profitable,
right?
What an amazing thing that Tesla kind of gets pushed by the side, and it's Edison and the profitability of electricity that ends up coming forward.
Yeah, he wasn't much of a businessman, and so he ended up signing contracts with these people where he was basically, in some ways because of his laxity, in other ways because of Edison and Morgan's shrewdness, he was basically chiseled out of quite a bit of, what was coming to him had he ordinarily been on his toes.
Yeah.
But from the standpoint of integration, I took a statement of his very seriously, which was, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, and this is what cosmologies are looking for, okay, what lies at the base of everything?
Yeah.
If you want to know the secrets of the universe, study energy, frequency, and vibration. Of course, that puts us right on the threshold of, of the quantum realm or the quantum platform. I mean, he knew that, that energy, frequency, and vibration, basically light energy or electromagnetic energy, was at the bottom of all things. And I took that clue, and I took, once I established the nexus between the two cosmologies is light energy or electromagnetism. Another clue I took from Einstein and another physicist I name in the book, Nassim Haramein, also Teilhard de Chardin, the French Jesuit paleontologist we'll talk about later.
Oh, yes.
And also as far back as Plato and Pythagoras. All of these individuals, their statement was, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, study geometry. Einstein felt that the key to unlock the unified theory lay in geometry. And he wasn't alone. There were others who felt the same way. Plato had a sign over his academy, let no one enter here who's ignorant of geometry. So as you look at creation itself and all the designs in creation, there are geometric configurations that it appears the implicate order translate its invisible blueprints into geometrically.
Yes.
And the three primary ones, and there are many, but the three primary ones that are found everywhere are the circle,
Yep.
the ellipse, or things ellipsoid, oval shape, and more specifically, the spiral.
Yes. Ah, you said a magic word, Joe. You said the word spiral. That's today's
So
magic word. So
the magic word, there should just, is the sign going to come down? I'm going to win $100 or something.
yes, exactly. Now, only you and I are old enough to know what you're referring to. But yeah, yeah. So, well, a couple magic words there for everybody that knows me. I think what they'll put on my tombstone is a Venn diagram because I use the Venn diagram uh,
Yeah,
over and over again. It's very simple yet elegant because those two intersecting circles are the nature of nature. And in fact, if you can look at them going sideways, but if you turn them up and the circles, you're spiraling again. So
yeah.
spiral circles, this is making a lot of sense to me.
Well, of course, you would need that image on your gravestone because it's the meeting place of two cosmologies.
There it is. There
It's
it is. Well,
the intersection of the above and the beneath, the visible and the invisible.
that's it. That's it. Exactly. That's
Right,
it. That's where transformation happens,
right.
is in that
So,
magic space.
so I went a little further and concluded that the infinite invisible, or the quantum realm, or spirit, incarnates itself in the space-time field, the three-dimensional space-time field that we occupy, the material part of our existence, in geometric forms, um, in ellipsoids, largely ellipsoids. And you see that in the solar system, you see that in the model of the atom, you see that in the model of the galaxy, okay?
Yeah.
Uh, and spirals and circles.
Yeah.
Now, there's another connection. There's a connection between the center points of those geometric figures and their energy source. Take the atom, for example, the nucleus of the atom. That's where it's all happening. The solar system is anchored, obviously, by the sun. Without the sun, there's no anchoring of the solar system. The planets spin off into outer space. Without the sun, there's no life on the planet. So everywhere at all scales, with ellipsoids, particularly spirals and circles, there's a dynamic tension or relationship between the hub or the center point and the periphery of whatever geometric configuration we're talking about. A dynamic tension,
Yes.
that gives balance to the periphery. Take the solar system, for example. It both anchors and gives life to the larger whole.
Yeah.
And that happens at all scales.
Yes.
And, furthermore, we know that the work of some of the physicists like Harameen and others have posited the existence of, in the spiral model, for example, okay, that empty space is basically the source of material creation. And it's been determined that electromagnetism spins material existence, spins material plane into existence by spinning itself into the space-time field like a mini tornado, like a spiral.
Yes.
Okay, and out of, the Latin term is ex nihilo, out of nothing, which is consistent with the scriptures. God creates.
Yes.
He speaks the word and it's created.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a relationship between the narrow or cone part of the spiral in creation and the energy that informs the spiral itself, which could probably be applied to the spiral dynamics model as well. There's an energy that keeps those, that unfolds those memes, and has the characteristic of each meme take on a different expression.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, I made the connection between the two cosmologies as light And then the geometrics, particularly the center point in the geometrics, being informed by electromagnetic energy. And that applies at all scales. I mean, that didn't come from me. This is basically what some of the people in the book that I mentioned, particularly Buckminster Fuller, in the chapter called The Architecture of Spirit. Also, Teilhard de Chardin refers to a coiling or a spiraling. And so, it's very, very clear that the implicate and the explicate orders, the invisible and visible worlds, are not only seamlessly connected, seamlessly co-present to each other, but there's an informing energy field that connects the two and creates out of what appears to be nothing or empty space, everything in material existence.
That's a great summary. I'd like to close with a thought. I'll hold the book up here. You talked about center point, Joe, that everything has a center point.
Mhm.
For those of you that don't have Joe's book yet, his book cover aptly points that out, in that the center point of light is associated with the heart, And that's so apropos because at the beginning of consciousness, it was thought that God dwelt in buildings made with hands. That, of course, is the first creation. And those buildings, specifically the temple, which is what it was referred to, the temple is represented, as are most things made with hands, by squares and rectangles.
Yes.
But when we look at it, form, squares, rectangles, that's not where God dwells.
No.
God dwells naturally as a center point in
Right.
that spiraling ellipsis configuration. And therefore God dwells, and this is where evolution took spiritual consciousness, was to understand God dwells in the heart. And so your ambient Christ book cover is very appropriate to everything you just said.
Yes, and to expand slightly on what you just mentioned, if you remember the construction of the tabernacle,
Yes.
In the Old Testament, and then the temple.
Same as the temple, which concretized it.
Right. Now, what was the center place in the tabernacle or temple called?
Well, you had the holy place, but God dwelt in the Holy of Holies.
The most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. And,
Yes.
and what was the center of the Holy of Holies above the Ark of the Covenant? What was the center of the temple? You remember?
Well, you're talking about the cherubim that were above the on the cover of the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant, but what dwelt between the cherubim and hung in the air over the ark? Now, you're the theologian, so I don't know if I had this word pronounced correctly.
Yeah.
Is it the Shekinah glory?
Oh, yes, that's where, the glory of God. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
That was the pillar of fire by
God's glory dwelt, literally,
the
yes.
pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire
Yes.
by night. It was basically a
Yes.
pillar of light.
Yes, exactly.
That was the thing that, and when the pillar moved, they pulled up 10 stakes and followed it. Okay.
Navigated the wilderness, yeah.
And that's a great outpicturing of the interior reality that you spoke of.
That's beautiful.
And not only that, the entire body operates out of an electric envelope. The brain, for example, let's take the two primary organs without spending a lot of time on it. The brain is an electromagnetic entity. Every neuron is connected to every other neuron in the body electrically. The heart, which you just referred to, in the image on my book, gives out 60 times more energy than the brain, and it's measurable. So the heart of things, literally and metaphorically, is where the fire of creation emanates from the innermost of things outward, from the center to their periphery. So these are interesting patterns.
They're excellent, and actually so much more that we've got to talk about, but we're going to end episode 2 here, everybody. This is just beginning the conversation. We'll head into episode 3 next week. Glad you were able to join us. If you have any questions, please send them to info@presence.tv. Per usual, you'll be getting a newsletter with the next Zoom podcast recording next week. Thanks for joining us, and we will see everybody next time.